The sudden tragic deaths of the standout athletes Nolan Wells of Mississippi, and if y'all remember before then, LSU Kyren Lacy, is highlighting a chilling and systemic pattern of missing Black youth in America. Wells is an 18-year-old. He played as a wide receiver for Southwest Mississippi Community College. He apparently, or purportedly, vanished on or about July 4th during an island boat trip where he was the sole Black youth among his peers. When his body was recovered days later, local authorities immediately suspected that he drowned and said that there was no foul play. But this triggered an intense public pushback from family members who then demanded transparency in the investigation. What we see in the Black community on an on and on basis is institutional default, meaning that as soon as individuals like LSU wide receiver Kyren Lacy or Wells Nolan disappears, among others, a pattern that also includes Black females and other males, Jerard Jackson at Michigan's festival, Tonea Miller in Miami Park, Juliana Nzita outside of a North Carolina church, Bassinga in Georgia, Trey Reed at Delta State University, Saniyya Dennis at SUNY Buffalo University. There's always this immediate statement of quote unquote self-harm, that these individuals died by suicide. And this is generally before there's any intensive investigation. What we have that is coincidental, is the lacking of forensic testing, questionable peer timeline tracking, witness interrogations, before they even have an opportunity to engage those avenues. When you have bodies that are found in public parks, remote waters, rapid institutional exits collides violently with some of our American unresolved history of racial terror. And this is resulting in why so many families are bypassing traditional state examiners for autopsies, and they're relying on other groups to do the same. Know Your Rights, for example, provides independent autopsies. Now, and I'm not sitting here making a demand for civil rights activism. That's not what I'm asking to do. But I am trying to look into how we go about demanding investigative transparencies. We cannot allow the lives of these young people to be reduced to rush police reports and forgotten hashtags. True justice requires systemic change. And what does that begin with? It begins with mandatory independent oversight of all of these ambiguous deaths of our minority young kids. I don't generally like to use the words kids. It refers to the term billy goat. So I'll use the term children. These individuals are 21 and under. And so they do meet the legal definition for that. When we talk about incidences that happen on college campus, we generally refer to the college students as students or children or teenagers. But when it comes time to addressing issues that plague within the African American community, that's not how we view them. So let's go back to Nolan Wells. Here, Nolan is a student at Mississippi, just graduated, now in a community college. Plays wide receiver. He is the sole Black child attending an outing on a boat trip on an island, a remote island in Mississippi, with several other white children. Now, does that in and of itself suggest foul play? No, it does not. And this is why I was even vocal online, wherein his family hired Ben Crump to immediately use that. I balanced the conversations of the race card respectfully, because here's my thing. Who's Katie? Apparently, he purportedly stayed behind when the rest of them left so that he can have time with a young white girl named Katie. So, we don't get to, as families, to play the race card when your son may be in a relationship with a white girl, when he was traveling with several whites and he was the only Black child. So you don't get to play the race card at that point in time and use that noun in an effort to galvanize Black activism. wherein your child is leading a life of someone who is immersing himself respectfully in white culture. And so we have to balance that conversation on how we use Black media, how we use, be it digital, social media, print, okay? How do we use those platforms and play the race card? So if you're the parent of a Black child who assimilates and spends a great deal of his or her time amongst white peers, and then when something like this happen, you don't get to bounce back to the community and say, hey, look, my son went missing. They did something wrong, because the quote unquote they in this instant happened to be the persons to whom you wanted your child to associate with, or to whom your child was associating with. But now when we look at this through double lenses, because I like to look at a glass half full, half empty, right? And viewing it through a double lens, there are several questions that should be asked. First, the statement by his peers was that the boat that they took began to suffer mechanical problems and also suffered leakage, wherein water was getting into the boat. If that is true, no one goes on to explain how did the rest of the kids get home if he did not, right? The second question is the role of one of the children. Mother is a judge. She deactivated her social media accounts. Why? If you're a judge, you're supposed to believe in transparency. Why step off social media? Why presume that people are going to be inquiring of you as to what transpired and what happened? What control, if at all, do you have over the narrative and your capacity as a judge? She said she took it off because she was being flooded with social media innuendos and the like. So what? You're a judge. And the minute you do that, you open the gateway for people to inquire whether you're utilizing your power, control, and dominion as a judge and your capacity of judgeship to control a narrative over other elected officials and employees within the police department. So when local authorities initially suspected that he drowned, they did that without even an autopsy. You recovered a body that had been immersed in water. Did you have the opportunity, what is the word I want to look for, to spot with your naked eye, to be able to say as police officers, there's no foul play? That's a very difficult assessment to make, right? Throughout the United States, there is 193,000 missing Black youth under the age of 18. That is documentation available through the FBI and CIC. Even though it now shows there are more whites, that's only because they combined white children with Hispanic. We know that Hispanics are monolithic. They're neither Black nor white without claiming or classifying, meaning you can be Spanish but also have African origin, or you can be Spanish of European descent. So simply by taking all the missing Hispanic children and placing them under the heading or category of white, to do nothing more, respectfully, than to give the false picture that there are as missing white children in America as there are Black is misleading. But to have 193,000 missing Black children under the age of 18 in the United States of America is astronomical. Many of these individuals that go missing are categorized as children who are runaways, and that has never been substantiated either. And so wherein there's this immediate rush to judgment, wherein there's this immediate, they ran away, they're hanging out with family and friends, or they don't want to be found. I don't know of too many children under the age of 18 who do not wish to be found. I do not know of too many individuals under the age of 21 who would want to be defined as quote unquote missing but not found. I don't know where local authorities generally get these presumptions, these prejudgments, as it pertains to identifying the matrix, the issues, the paradox, the paradigms, whatever word people want to best use to describe issues that plague Black youth in America. I don't know where the presumptions come from, but they're totally false and misleading. For 193,000 to be missing is of great concern. An organization, the African American Juvenile Justice Project, has been engaged in this research and investigation for about 2 decades now. They have a lot of information that they make available, and they speak on a national platform in this space as well. But this is institutional default mirrors, meaning to immediately to default that when you have a tragic death like former LSU wide receiver Kyren Lacy, and you assume that it's suicide, and then you take all of the other deaths for which I just presented to you, and you state that they died by suicide without any other evidence. It is the same that happened with a rapper, the gentleman out of the Bronx, New York. Cal, 40 Cal, has a daughter named Saniyya Dennis of the Bronx, New York. She was an honor roll student in Buffalo University. They immediately said that she jumped into Niagara Falls. Imagine that. Okay, no evidence. No, to this day, they never recovered her body. Juliana Nzita was found hung outside of a church in North Carolina. Bassinga in Georgia. Trey Reed at Delta State University. All of these individuals that were found dead, hung. Jerard Jackson, hung right outside of a corridor of the Michigan Festival. Tonea Miller, found hung in a park in Miami. You're telling me that these black children are walking around with ropes and they're hanging themselves? Let us be clear. Statistically speaking, black youth are less likely to commit suicide than any other race and or ethnicity or religious sector. That's number one. Number two, you don't find black youth walking around with ropes. But if I was a forensic analyst, what I could simply do is look at the ropes that were hung around their neck. We have the ability now to find out where the ropes were purchased based on the fiber, who's the manufacturer, and find out when and how were these ropes gathered. I mean, who's actually walking around with ropes where you have this many black youth hung? In Saniyya Dennis's case, they didn't find her body. At least that's what they say. Within the weekend of her disappearance, there was a person who runs a boat, a tourist boat through Niagara Falls, who went online and said that he and or one of his staff members posted that they discovered the body of a black female. But Niagara Falls Authority and Erie County authorities never confirmed what the people on the boat found or saw. So to this day, since 2021, her body has never been recovered. There were 3 white males who were persons of interest. They had been asking for them to turn over videotapes of the bus. You say that she went on a bus. Where's the videotapes of the local bus showing that she's in the bus? Where's the videotape of them showing that she was in the bus terminal? So you have no video footage that even identifies her in the park other than a Google map that they used. And the Google map simply shows a dot, like a speckle. And you're stating from the satellites of all the people that would have been in Niagara Falls, that dot was her. Manage that. But the problem that we have is by immediately declaring these deaths as self-harm or accidents, the justice system frequently bypasses critical forensic testing. They don't bother to converse with the friends. And when you do you cooperate? Their statements. Let's go back to Nolan Wells. There are about 3 different comments that were made at 3 different times from his friends, or so-called friends, to include but not be limited to the original boat that they were on was leaking. And then there were allegations that there was a verbal altercation. And then there was another allegation that he and a quote-unquote girl named Katie had basically wanted some alone time. But then she comes back through her friends and say she had just met him that day. And so she didn't ask for any alone time. So here's the dilemma. Is it possible that someone saw in Mississippi this black male alone with the white female and altercation ensued and it resulted in someone maybe engaging in a violent act toward him? Is that possible in a state like Mississippi, the Delta of Mississippi? But then we have to ask ourselves, is Mississippi that bad to where this black male felt comfortable assimilating and socializing with 3 to 4 other white males? But if you even look at the photograph that they posted of him on the boat, one of the individuals appears to be under the influence of alcohol. He has the foam of what appears to be beer dripping all over him. So could it be that these individuals were intoxicated? Could it be that Nolan fell off the boat and that they were too intoxicated to actually be able to retrieve his body and he floated. Could that be a scenario? If we're going to rely on the one piece of evidence that no one has disputed, that is the last photograph that he took with these individuals, there is no doubt, left to no question, that one of those and two of the individuals have bare hands, but both look inebriated, but one is immersed in the foam of beer. And so, based on that, is it possible that these kids were under the influence? He fell off. They didn't try to get him or save him. And they're too embarrassed now to say that they basically left one of their friends out to die. Is that possible? One of the things we balance when you have a conversation like this is whether or not race and race alone played a role. And so to immediately jump that it's a racial issue would be suspect at this point. It would be premature. It would be premature only to the extent that if he felt comfortable enough to associate himself with 3 to 4 other white males and take a boat trip with them, then can we identify those individuals as being racist? And so there are people that are pointing to a history of scenarios where blacks have been the only persons amongst a group of whites and something has gone wrong, to include but not be limited to a few years ago, a black woman was at a slumber party with her white female counterpart, and apparently she fell off of the balcony. At least that's what they wanted to say, that at some point around 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, she decided to go out on the balcony and get drunk and fall off and die. That's what they say. Is it possible that sometimes when individuals under these circumstances are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, that maybe there's a side of them that comes out that most people are not cognizant of, that you could be this only black individual and be amongst white peers, and they get to drinking and or doing drugs, and there becomes verbal altercations that transpire as a result of that, an exchange of words that might be deemed offensive. And based upon that, it could lead to an individual revealing him or herself. There's an old saying, a sober mind, right? A drunken man speaks with a sober mind. So if a drunken man speaks with a sober mind and these individuals were under the influence, could that in and of itself have resulted in an altercation between these individuals? Last, there's another person who posted a purported video online in which he claims that there was a verbal altercation. While there is a verbal altercation in that video, the video shows about 5 or 6 different boats. You do not see a picture of Nolan Wells, and you do not know and or have evidence to identify if the person's arguing is in fact him or the persons associated with him. So that video is unsubstantiated for the sole purpose of asserting that a verbal altercation ensued prior to his disappearance. But what we do know is that there are 193,000 missing black children in America as of today, July 9th, according to NCIC. What we do know is that the sudden tragic deaths of 2 student athletes, Nolan Wells and Kyren Lacy, has triggered a larger conversation in this country as it pertains to missing and exploited black youth. What we know about the complex student tragedies is that there is no evidence that any of this was suicide. What we know without a shadow of doubt is the rush to judgment without forensic testing. What we know is that black families in America should not have to rely upon secondary or independent autopsies because they cannot trust their local coroners or medical examiners who may be covering up bigger stories. What we know is that Nolan Wells felt comfortable enough to go, or so we suspect, hang out with 3 other white males. Or was there something to be said about that photograph? There is no evidence from his family that suggests that he was there without them knowing. There's no evidence to date that suggests that he went to the island against his will. And there is no evidence to suggest to date that the photograph that was released of him and the 3 guys sitting on the boat, meaning somebody else had to take the photo, okay, that suggested foul play. Or could it have been? Do we know whether he was under undue influence or force, duress at the time that that photograph was taken? Do we know whether or not he was there against his will? What I don't understand is when you have areas like that, I am sure that there are other people who saw a black male on the island, not just the three individuals to whom he was with. We can only hope that those individuals would come forward. So here's our call to action with regard to what can families and communities do to turn your outrage into action. Advocate for legislation. And I know people want to get away from that, but you shouldn't. Throughout the United States, there have been a request for what they call an ebony alert. And the African American Juvenile Justice Project has been on the front line for this. And an ebony alert is an alert system, is like an amber, if you will. But this is to target and allow for information about missing and exploited Black children to be immediately identified. But with the ability to develop apps, there are some who have created their own online apps, but you still need the cooperation of law enforcement to immediately be able to trigger investigations and searches. So contact your local advocates for that. Contact your local and state representatives to support bills that strip local precincts of exclusive controls over investigations when investigative bias is present. We know that DOJ generally gets to do that, but by the time they come in to do that, or state bodies, it's generally too late. You would want that done immediately. You would want a mechanism where you can report someone missing and not have to wait 24 hours if they're age 18 or older. A parent or family generally knows the routine of a loved one. And so a 24-hour wait or hold period before an investigative team can take a report and then pursue it is of great concern as well. Support independent forensics, contribute to community-led initiatives and organizations that have autopsy initiatives like African American Juvenile Justice Project, Know Your Rights Camp, which directly funds independent forensic reviews for families seeking the truth. Amplify their names. Amplify the names like Kyren Lacy, like Nolan Wells, Saniyya Dennis, Tonea, Jerard Jackson. Amplify these names, but not simply just with hashtags. Raise your voice, share their stories, and refuse to accept a standard institutional silence. And I say this to our professional athletes, NBA, NFL, Major League, WNBA. You all are pretty silent with situations like this. You're starting to act like puppets. You really are. And, we must force the justice system to value Black lives equally in death as it should in life. And, it's bigger than simply playing the game. And you all are in a position to utilize your platforms to ask questions. Shaquille O'Neal, you attended LSU, and so did Angel Reese, and so there should be this call to action on, what really happened to Lacy. Thank you for joining me on Filtering Sports. This is Lisa Hampton. Love is selflessly authentic. Having all money, power, talent, opportunities now. Let that resonate. We recently dropped new music for Ron Ball, The Allen Iverson Way. We have about 3 new tracks for the soundtrack. And we're building. They're available online. You might ask, why are you tying that into a show like that? Because Ron Ball, The Allen Iverson Way also speaks about the social justice issues that impacted youth back then and now. And this clearly allows us to see that this is a continuing, right? It's definitely a continuing. It didn't end when he retired from the league. It's something that is still happening now. And so we have to practice what we preach, right? And that also means us recognizing what steps we're taking with Ron Ball, The Allen Iverson Way. I've been quick to say that he performed and did his memoir and his documentary to tell his story. But I'm telling the capital HISTORY, history. And you can see this still playing out with these tragic deaths. Okay? Thank you.